I was knee-deep in a dumpster behind a Lubbock diner when a man in a $3,000 coat asked, "Are you Sarah Donald?" That question changed everything. The rain had been falling in thin sheets for an hour, soaking through the cardboard I'd laid across the alley concrete. My fingers, raw from the cold, sorted through soggy takeout containers and coffee-stained napkins. The smell of grease and decay clung to everything, including me. I'd found half a burger wrapped in foil when the voice cut through the rain. "Excuse me." I froze. Nobody talked to homeless people after midnight. Nobody talked to homeless people at all. I turned slowly, water dripping from my hair. The man stood at the mouth of the alley under a streetlight, perfectly dry beneath a black umbrella. His coat looked expensive, wool, tailored, the kind Michael used to wear to court. Everything about him belonged in a different world than this one. "Are you Sarah Donald?" My throat closed. When you've been invisible for months, hearing your name feels like being struck by lightning. Depends who's asking. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against wet asphalt. Mid-40s, maybe. Calm eyes. Professional bearing. The kind of man who solved problems for a living. "My name is Claiborne. I'm a private investigator from Houston." He reached into his coat, producing a business card and something else. A sealed envelope with my name typed across the front. "I've been looking for you for months." I almost laughed. The sound came out broken. "Trust me, you're the only one. May I?" He gestured toward the dumpster. I climbed out, suddenly aware of how I must look. Soaked, desperate, covered in things I didn't want to identify. He didn't flinch, didn't step back, just handed me the envelope. "Your biological father passed away 6 weeks ago. He left you an inheritance." The world tilted. Rain continued falling, but everything else went quiet. "My father died when I was 6. Claiborne shook his head. "No, Sarah. The man who raised you wasn't your father." The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Real. Solid. More real than anything had felt in months. "I don't understand." Richard Hale. Oil executive, philanthropist. He spent considerable resources making sure you were found. Claiborne's voice remained steady, matter of fact. "But the details need to be discussed in person, somewhere private." Hale. The name meant nothing to me, yet something stirred in my memory, distant, elusive. He owned Hale Corporation. Quite substantial holdings. I stared at the envelope, water blurring the ink of my name. Why now? Why after all this time? "Because he's dead, and you're his only heir." The words hit like physical blows. Heir. Inheritance. Father. I almost said no to that man in the expensive coat. Almost walked away from the only chance I'd ever get. How many of us ignore the doors that open right in front of us? If you're someone who believes in second chances, who thinks everyone deserves a shot at redemption, tap that like button. Because sometimes a simple click is someone's reminder that their story matters too. I need to take you to the estate if you're willing. Tonight, if possible. Claiborne checked his watch, a movement so normal it felt surreal. "There are legal requirements, time constraints." "How much?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "The inheritance?" I nodded. $69 million. The number hung in the air between us, impossible and absurd. I'd been counting quarters that morning. Now this stranger was talking about millions. "There's just one condition." Of course there was. Nothing came free, especially not for people like me. I'd learned that the hard way. "What kind of condition?" Claiborne closed his umbrella, apparently deciding we'd talked long enough in the rain. "That's something we need to discuss at the ranch. 3 months ago, I had a house, a marriage, and a future. Then Michael Donald made sure I had nothing." The memory hit as Claiborne led me toward his black sedan. 3 months felt like 3 years, but some images stayed crystal clear. The morning I'd driven my white Lexus to the Hill Country Club for the charity brunch, discussing the children's hospital fundraiser over mimosas and fresh fruit. My wedding ring catching sunlight through tall windows. Women in pearls asking about my vacation to Napa, about Michael's latest case victories. I'd belonged somewhere then. "Mrs. Donald, your husband's done such wonderful work for the community," the hospital board president had said, refilling my champagne flute. Austin's lucky to have attorneys like Michael. I'd smiled, proud, grateful, completely unaware that Michael was spending his lunch hours in hotel rooms with Rebecca Chun, his litigation partner. The same Rebecca who'd be sitting across from me in divorce court 6 weeks later, her hand resting possessively on Michael's arm. Claiborne opened the passenger door. The leather seats looked cleaner than any bed I'd slept in recently. The estate is about 2 hours south, he said. We can talk during the drive, if you prefer. I slipped inside, immediately aware of the warmth. When had I last been truly warm? How did you find me? Security cameras. Missing persons networks. You've been off-grid, but not invisible. Claiborne started the engine. Your ex-husband reported you missing after the divorce was finalized. Claimed he was concerned for your welfare. The laugh that escaped was bitter. Concerned for his reputation, maybe. Michael's concern had lasted exactly as long as it took reporters to stop asking questions about his wife's disappearance. After that, I'd ceased to exist in his world entirely. The night I discovered the affair replayed as we drove through empty streets. I'd come home early from book club, wanting to surprise Michael with his favorite takeout from that Italian place downtown. The house had been dark except for the bedroom light upstairs. I'd found them together in our bed. Our sheets. Rebecca had looked over Michael's shoulder at me standing in the doorway, and she'd smiled. Actually smiled, like she'd won something valuable. Sarah. Michael's voice had been calm, almost relieved. We need to talk. No apology. No shame. Just immediate transition to damage control. How long? I'd asked. Does it matter? It did matter. It mattered that our 10-year marriage had been dissolving while I planned anniversary trips and attended his work events. It mattered that I'd trusted him completely while he'd been calculating exactly how to remove me from his life. I want you out, I'd said. Actually, Rebecca had spoken from beneath our comforter. This is Michael's house. His name's on the deed. She'd been right. The house, the accounts, the car, everything had been strategically placed in Michael's name over the years. For tax purposes, he'd always explained. I'd been married to a corporate attorney for a decade without understanding that I'd signed my life away in increments. The divorce proceedings had been swift and brutal. Michael weaponized every connection he built in Austin's legal community. Judges who'd played golf with him. Lawyers who owed him favors. A system designed to protect people exactly like him. I'd sat in that courtroom watching him and Rebecca present their case. She as his counsel now, having conveniently left their firm to avoid conflict of interest claims. They painted me as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, a burden Michael had carried for years out of misguided loyalty. Your Honor, my client's estranged wife has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior, Rebecca had argued, her voice measured and professional. She's made wild accusations about their marriage, refused counseling, and demonstrated an inability to maintain employment. The employment part had been particularly cruel. I'd left my marketing job 2 years earlier, when Michael suggested I focus on volunteer work and supporting his career. We don't need your income, he'd said. I want to take care of you. Another strategic move I'd mistaken for love. When the judge awarded Michael everything, house, cars, savings, even my grandmother's ring, Rebecca had reached over and squeezed his hand. A gesture of comfort that looked like affection to observers but felt like victory to me. I'd walked out of that courthouse with $112 from my personal checking account and a suitcase Michael had packed for me. My own clothes felt foreign after living in borrowed spaces for weeks during the proceedings. That first night sleeping in my car behind the Walmart on I-35, I'd understood something new about silence. Not just quiet, but the complete absence of mattering to anyone. Customers walked past my windshield without seeing me. Store employees emptied trash cans 20 feet away without acknowledging my existence. By the second week, friends stopped returning calls. By the first month, I'd learned that dignity wasn't something you lost gradually. It was something that disappeared completely once people decided you no longer belonged in their world. The hardest part wasn't losing the house or the money. It was realizing how quickly people forget you exist when you stop being useful to them. If you've ever felt invisible, if you know what it's like when people look right through you, leave a comment below. Let's make sure no one here feels alone in that experience. Because your story, whatever it is, matters to someone. Michael kept your things? Claiborne asked, interrupting my thoughts. He kept everything. The heater in Claiborne's car hummed softly as we drove through the empty streets, but I was back in that alley again, remembering the night everything finally broke. It had been my worst night yet, the storm that brought Claiborne to find me. But before he'd appeared with his impossible questions and sealed envelope, I'd been alone with something darker than the rain. The diner closed at 10. I'd learned their schedule over the previous week, knew the kitchen staff, threw out the day's leftovers around 10:30. Good timing meant finding something still warm, something that hadn't been sitting in the rain for hours. That night, timing hadn't mattered. The cold had settled into my bones weeks earlier and never left. Even inside Claiborne's heated car, I could still feel it, the kind of cold that makes you understand why people just stop fighting. My clothes had been soaked for days. The cardboard I'd used for shelter had disintegrated in the storm, leaving me with nothing but concrete and whatever scraps of dignity I could salvage. I'd been crouched behind the dumpster when the kitchen door opened. 2 employees came out for their smoke break, talking and laughing about weekend plans. Normal people with normal problems: rent, relationships, which movie to watch. They couldn't see me in the shadows, but I could hear every word. Their voices carried the casual confidence of people who belonged somewhere, who had keys to apartments and names on utility bills, and people who expected them home. I'd press myself against the brick wall, trying to disappear completely. "You see that homeless lady who's been hanging around?" one of them said. "Yeah, she's been here every night this week. Manager's getting nervous. Probably should call someone. I can't have people like that scaring off customers."
People like that.
The words had hit like a physical blow.
People like that.
I'd become a category, a problem to be managed. Not Sarah, who used to organize charity events and contribute to community planning meetings. Not someone who'd once mattered to anyone.
Just a person like that.
After they'd gone back inside, I'd sat in the rain and let the truth settle over me. Michael had been right about everything. I couldn't maintain employment. I'd let him convince me to quit my job. I was financially irresponsible. I'd trusted him with everything and kept nothing for myself. I was a burden. Everyone who'd known me before had stopped answering my calls. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I wasn't enough. The thought had come quietly, without drama. Just a simple recognition that some people weren't built to survive when everything fell apart. Some people were meant to be taken care of, and when that ended, so did they. I'd looked up at the rain falling through the streetlight and wondered how much longer I could keep doing this. The hunger was constant now, a hollow ache that had become normal. The cold was worse. But the silence was what really killed you, the complete absence of mattering to anyone, anywhere. I'd closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time someone had said my name with warmth instead of pity or annoyance. Months. Maybe longer. The dumpster offered nothing that night except more evidence of how far I'd fallen. Soggy fries from the afternoon shift. Half a sandwich someone had taken 2 bites of before deciding it wasn't worth finishing. I'd eaten it anyway because hunger makes you grateful for things that would have disgusted you in your previous life. That's when I'd started thinking about the interstate. Just thinking, not planning. But the thoughts had been there. About how easy it would be to walk onto I-27 in the rain, when visibility was low and drivers wouldn't have time to stop. About how Michael would probably feel guilty for about 5 minutes before moving on with Rebecca and their perfect life in the house that used to be mine. The rain had gotten heavier. I'd pulled my knees to my chest and let myself imagine what it would be like to just stop trying. To stop waking up every morning with the exhausting work of staying alive when nobody cared if you succeeded. I was 30 seconds away from walking into traffic that night. 30 seconds from believing Michael was right about everything. If this story is reaching someone who's had that thought, that maybe everyone would be better off without you, please hit subscribe. Your presence in this community might be the reminder someone else needs that tomorrow can look completely different. Don't let your story end in Chapter 3. I'd been sitting there in the dark, water pooling around me, when footsteps approached the alley. Measured. Deliberate. Different from the kitchen workers or late-night customers. I'd looked up expecting another security guard or police officer ready to move me along, but instead saw a man in an expensive coat holding an umbrella. Standing there like he'd been looking for something specific. Looking for me. "Excuse me. Are you Sarah Donald?" Those words had pulled me back from the edge I'd been approaching. Not because they offered hope. I'd learned not to trust hope, but because they suggested I still existed in someone's world. That somewhere, somehow, my name still meant something to someone, even if I couldn't imagine why. The drive to Hale Ranch stretched through the night like a passage between worlds. Mile markers blurred past in the darkness, while Claiborne answered my questions with careful precision, revealing just enough to keep me listening, but not enough to satisfy the growing disbelief in my chest. Richard Hale built his fortune in oil, then moved into renewable energy before it was fashionable, he explained, his hands steady on the wheel. Smart investments. Smarter timing. He was worth considerably more than most people realized. And he never married?
He did.
Charlotte Hale died in 1998. No children from that marriage. But he had me.
Yes.
With a woman named Elena Vasquez. She worked as a translator for his company in the early 90s. My mother. The name stirred nothing. No recognition. No emotional pull. The woman who'd raised me had been my father's second wife, kind but distant. She died when I was 12, taking whatever secrets she might have kept with her. What happened to Elena? She died in a car accident when you were 6 months old. Richard arranged for your adoption through private channels. Made sure you were placed with a good family. The headlights cut through empty highway, each mile taking me further from everything familiar. Further from the dumpster behind the diner, from the rain-soaked alley where I'd been ready to give up. The heating vents blew warm air that smelled like leather and possibility. He never tried to contact me. He watched from a distance. Made sure you were provided for. Your adoptive father's business loans, your college tuition, that wasn't coincidence. The information landed like puzzle pieces I couldn't quite fit together. My adoptive father's construction company had somehow always found the right investors at the right moments. My scholarship to UT had come through a foundation I'd never heard of before or after. Anonymous gifts that had seemed like luck at the time. Richard wanted you to have a normal life, Claiborne continued. But he also wanted to make sure you were taken care of if something happened to him. We turned off the highway onto a private road marked only by a simple wooden sign, Hale Ranch. The asphalt was perfect, newly paved, lined with oak trees that formed a canopy overhead. After another 20 minutes, the road opened onto a circular drive. The mansion appeared like something from a dream. 3 stories of limestone and glass, lit by ground lighting that made it glow against the dark Texas sky. Wide steps led to a front entrance flanked by columns, and beyond that, I could see gardens and outbuildings stretching into the distance. This wasn't just a house. It was an estate worthy of old money and careful planning. $69 million, I whispered, the number still impossible to believe. Conservative estimate. The ranch alone is worth $15 million. Then there's the company, investments, trust funds. Claiborne parked near the front steps. A man in his 60s emerged from the house, moving with the measured pace of someone comfortable with late-night business meetings. He wore a crisp suit despite the hour. Miss Donald, he said as I climbed out of the car. I'm Thomas Webb, Mr. Hale's attorney. I've been expecting you. The entrance hall was all marble and warm light, with a staircase that curved upward like something from a movie set. Oil paintings lined the walls, landscapes mostly, but I caught glimpses of family portraits as we walked. None of the faces looked familiar. Webb led us to an office lined with law books and filing cabinets. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and on it sat a folder thick with documents. Please sit. Webb gestured to leather chairs that probably cost more than I'd made in my best year. I know this is overwhelming, but we have legal requirements to fulfill. He opened the folder and removed a document with official seals and signatures. The last will and testament of Richard Daniel Hale, he began, his voice taking on the formal tone of legal proceedings. To my biological daughter, Sarah Elena Donald, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, business holdings, investments, and personal effects, totaling approximately $69 million. The words hung in the air. $69 million. More money than I could properly understand. Enough to buy safety, security, revenge on Michael, anything I'd ever wanted. $69 million sounded like a fantasy to someone who'd been counting quarters. But here's what I want you to remember. Your breakthrough doesn't have to be this dramatic. It just has to be yours. If you're waiting for your door to open, tap that like button as a promise to yourself that you'll recognize it when it comes. Because someone watching this needs that reminder today. However, Webb continued, this inheritance comes with one condition.
Of course it did.
I'd learn not to trust anything that seemed too good to be true. You must take residence at Hale Ranch for 30 consecutive days and personally oversee a final audit of the Hale Corporation's financial records. Only upon completion of this task will the inheritance be legally transferred to you. 30 days. Beginning immediately. The clock starts when you sign the acceptance papers. I looked around the office, at the luxury surrounding me, then thought about the alley behind the diner. The choice wasn't difficult. Where do I sign? Webb smiled for the first time since I'd met him. We'll handle the paperwork in the morning. For now, let's get you settled in your room. He left you everything on one condition. The words echoed as he led me upstairs to a bedroom that was larger than most apartments. But even as I sank into silk sheets for the first time in months, I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard Hale's condition was more than it seemed. Some gifts came with prices you didn't understand until it was too late to refuse them. I woke up in silk. The realization hit me slowly, emerging from sleep like surfacing from deep water. Silk sheets, silk curtains filtering morning light, silk robe folded at the foot of a bed larger than my entire car. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it came back, the alley, Claiborne, the will reading. $69 million hanging on 30 days of playing house in a dead man's mansion. The bedroom was decorated in cream and gold, with furniture that looked like museum pieces. A chandelier hung overhead, catching sunlight and throwing tiny rainbows across the ceiling. Everything was perfect, expensive, and completely foreign to who I'd become over the past 3 months. I sat up and caught my reflection in the vanity mirror across the room. The woman staring back looked like a refugee who'd wandered into the wrong movie. My hair was clean now. I'd spent an hour in the bathroom last night just standing under hot water, but my face still carried the hollow look of someone who'd been hungry too long. I kept waiting for someone to tell me I didn't belong in that beautiful room. Kept expecting them to realize they'd made a mistake. If you've ever felt like you don't deserve good things, like happiness belongs to other people, leave a comment about one thing you're proud of accomplishing. Let's celebrate each other's wins, because someone here needs to see that they're not alone in feeling unworthy. If I fail, it all disappears. The thought had kept me awake most of the night, despite the luxury surrounding me. 30 days to prove I could handle this world, to complete an audit I knew nothing about, to somehow earn what Richard Hale had left me. 30 days before I either became wealthy beyond imagination or returned to the streets with nothing. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Ms. Donald. A woman's voice, warm but respectful. I'm Maria Santos, the housekeeper. May I come in? Please. Maria entered carrying a breakfast tray. Fresh fruit, coffee that smelled like heaven, toast cut into perfect triangles. She was maybe 55, with graying hair pulled back and kind eyes that assessed me without judgment. Mr. Webb thought you might prefer to eat in your room this morning while you adjust. She set the tray on a small table by the window, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing this house for years. How long have you worked here? 15 years. Since just after Mrs. Hale passed. Maria straightened the curtains, though they didn't need straightening. Mr. Richard was a good man. Quiet but good. What was he like? Careful. Thoughtful. He spent a lot of time in his study, going through old papers and photographs. She paused, choosing her words. He talked about you sometimes. Wondered how you were doing. The coffee was perfect, rich, hot, real. I'd been living on gas station coffee for months when I could afford it. The staff knows why I'm here. We know you're his daughter. We know about the condition in the will. Maria's expression grew more serious. We're here to help however we can. The ranch is big, easy to get lost in if you're not familiar with the layout. How big? Main house has 26 rooms. Then there are the guest quarters, staff housing, stables, workshops. Most of it's been closed off for years. I looked out the window at gardens stretching toward hills in the distance. Which parts are closed? The east wing mostly. Mr. Richard stopped using those rooms after his wife died. Too many memories. Something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. Is there something I should know about the East Wing? Maria hesitated, her hands smoothing the already smooth bedspread. It's just old, that's all. Some of the staff prefer to avoid it. Electrical problems, creaky floors. Nothing to concern yourself with during your stay. But her voice carried a warning I couldn't quite identify. After she left, I spent the morning exploring the main areas of the house. The kitchen was enormous, designed for entertaining large groups. The living room could have housed my entire former life comfortably. Everything was maintained perfectly, but felt somehow hollow, like a museum after closing time. The staff I encountered, a groundskeeper, a cook, a young man who tended the stables, were polite but distant. They answered my questions with a careful respect due to Richard Hale's daughter, but I caught them exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. It was late afternoon when I found the door. I'd been wandering the hallways, trying to map the layout in my mind, when I turned down a corridor that felt different from the rest. Colder. The windows here were smaller, the light dimmer. At the end of the hall stood a heavy wooden door with wrought iron hinges. It was locked. Not just locked, secured with a chain and an old padlock that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I stood there staring at it, trying to understand why someone would chain a door shut from the outside. What was behind it that required that level of security? Ms. Donald. I turned to find Maria approaching, her expression troubled. You shouldn't be in this part of the house. Why is this door chained? Mr. Richards' orders. It's been that way since. She trailed off. Since what? Since he died. Some rooms are better left alone. But as we walked back toward the main house, I couldn't shake the feeling that Maria was lying. The chain and padlock looked much older than 6 weeks. Someone had been keeping that door locked for much longer than Richard Hale had been dead. By the 10th night, I'd almost convinced myself I belonged here. Almost. The routine had settled into something comfortable. Morning coffee on the terrace, afternoons reviewing Hale Corporation files in Richard's study, evenings walking the grounds as sunset painted the sky orange and red. The audit work was complex but manageable, mostly checking financial records against bank statements and investment portfolios. 20 days left. The countdown had become background noise, a constant awareness that this paradise had an expiration date. I was reading quarterly reports in the study when it happened. The footsteps started around midnight.
Slow. Heavy.
Coming from somewhere deep in the East Wing. I'd been staying up late, working through boxes of documents Webb had provided, when the sound cut through the silence. At first, I thought it might be Maria or one of the other staff doing late-night maintenance. But the footsteps had weight to them, a deliberate rhythm that didn't match any of the people I'd met. They stopped directly behind the chain door. I sat frozen in Richard's leather chair, papers scattered across the desk, listening to silence that felt heavier than the sounds preceding it. The air conditioning hummed. A clock ticked somewhere in the darkness. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away from the door, fading back into the depths of the East Wing. I waited another hour before going to bed, checking locks twice, and pulling the curtains shut. The next morning, Maria appeared at breakfast looking pale and tired. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, but her eyes avoided mine. "I heard footsteps last night. In the East Wing." Her hand trembled as she set down my coffee cup. "Old houses make noise. Settling, you know. Pipes and floorboards." "Maria." I kept my voice gentle but firm. Those weren't settling noises. She sat down across from me, which she'd never done before. Her professional composure cracked slightly. "Don't go near that door," she said quietly. "Whatever you hear, whatever you think you know, stay away from the East Wing." "Why?" "Because some things are better left alone." Mr. Richard understood that. Before I could ask more questions, she retreated to the kitchen, leaving me with unanswered questions and the growing certainty that everyone here was keeping secrets. I spent the morning trying to focus on audit work, but concentration proved impossible. Around noon, I decided to check my email on the computer Webb had provided for business purposes. Most messages were automated notifications from banks and investment firms. But one caught my attention, no sender name, just a string of numbers where the address should be. The subject line read, "Warning." I opened it. You were never meant to find this place. He left you a curse, not a gift. Leave before you learn what he really was. The cursor blinked at me while I read the message 3 times. Anonymous emails were probably harmless, someone trying to spook the new heiress, maybe hoping to scare me away from my inheritance. But combined with the footsteps and Maria's warnings, the timing felt deliberate.
My phone rang. Claiborne.
Ms. Donald, we need to talk. Something's developed. 20 minutes later, he arrived looking grim. We met in the study, away from the staff quarters. Your ex-husband has filed a petition with the court, he began without preamble. He's challenging the inheritance. The world tilted slightly. On what grounds? Mental incompetence. He's claiming you're psychologically unfit to handle a large inheritance. Says you disappeared for months, exhibited erratic behavior, made false accusations against him during the divorce. Just when I thought I was safe, Michael found a way to attack again. Some people won't let you heal because your healing threatens their version of who you should be. If someone's trying to convince you that you can't change, can't grow, can't become better, hit that subscribe button as proof they're wrong. Your growth is the best revenge against people who need you to stay small. Michael's face flashed in my memory, calm, calculating, always 3 moves ahead.
He can't do that.
We're divorced. He has no legal standing. He's arguing that as your former spouse, he has a duty to protect your interests. He's requesting the court appoint a conservator to manage the estate until your fitness can be evaluated. The familiar rage built in my chest. Michael, reaching across the months of silence to destroy my life again. But underneath the anger was something colder, recognition. How did he even know about the inheritance? Claiborne's expression darkened. That's what concerns me. This information was confidential. Attorney-client privilege, sealed records. Michael shouldn't have known Richard Hale existed, much less that you were his heir. Unless he's known for years. Claiborne pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes. I did some research after his petition was filed. Michael Donald has been receiving payments from Hale Industries for the past 8 years. Consulting fees, according to the records. The numbers on the screen swam in front of me. Regular payments, tens of thousands of dollars, all made to Michael's law firm. Consulting on what? Privacy law. Corporate secrecy. Specifically, how to keep information about illegitimate children sealed from public records. The truth hit like a physical blow. Michael had been paid to help Richard hide my existence. All those years of marriage, he'd known exactly who I was and had been profiting from keeping it secret. The divorce, I said slowly. He made sure I lost everything so I'd be desperate when this happened. It appears that way. The timing suggests coordination. I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens. 20 days left of my 30-day requirement, and now Michael was trying to steal everything again. But this time felt different. This time, I understood what I was fighting for. Can he stop the inheritance? He can delay it. Force a competency hearing, drag out legal proceedings. The 30-day clock keeps running regardless. And if I don't complete the audit in time? The inheritance reverts to the state. Michael gets nothing, but neither do you. I turn back to Claiborne. There's something else going on here. The staff won't talk about the East Wing. There are footsteps at night. Someone sent me an anonymous email warning me to leave. What kind of email? I showed him the message on the computer screen. He read it twice, his expression growing more troubled. Ms. Donald, I think it's time you learned exactly what Richard Hale was hiding. That night, fury replaced fear. Claiborne had left me with questions I couldn't answer, and a timeline I couldn't escape. 18 days remaining, Michael circling like a vulture, and secrets buried somewhere in this house that might explain everything. If Richard Hale had been paying Michael to hide my existence, then this inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about truth. And if Michael was trying to steal it from me again, he'd picked the wrong woman this time. I'd learned something about myself during those months on the street. When you lose everything, you discover what you're actually made of. I wasn't the helpless victim Michael had created in divorce court. I was the woman who'd survived 3 months of homelessness and walked into this mansion ready to fight for what was mine. Time to prove it. Richard's study had been my workspace for 10 days, but I'd been treating it like a library, respectfully reviewing the files Webb had provided. Tonight, I was going to treat it like a crime scene. The room was different in darkness. Shadows transformed familiar furniture into obstacles, and the silence felt charged with possibility. I started with the desk drawers, methodically removing every paper, every file, every forgotten receipt. Nothing. The filing cabinets came next. Financial records, tax documents, correspondence with lawyers and investment firms. All legitimate, all clean, all useless for understanding why Michael had been receiving payments for 8 years. 2 hours in, frustration was winning over determination. I'd found nothing that explained Michael's connection to Richard, nothing that revealed why my father had hired my future ex-husband to keep secrets about me. That's when I noticed the bookshelf. Not the books themselves, but the space behind them. One section looked different, newer, like it had been added recently. I pulled down volume after volume until I found what I was looking for, a hidden panel, and behind it, a safe. The combination lock stared at me, 6 digits that could be anything. I tried Richard's birth year, the year he'd married Charlotte, the year I was born. Nothing. Then I remembered something Maria had said about Elena Vasquez, my birth mother. She died in a car accident when I was 6 months old. I pulled out my phone and searched for Elena Vasquez, translator early 1990s. The obituary was brief, but it gave me what I needed, her birth date. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were 3 items, a manila envelope, a leather journal, and a metal box about the size of a jewelry case. I opened the envelope first. Bank records, wire transfers, check stubs, all documenting payments to Michael Donald's law firm, exactly as Claiborne had discovered. But these records went back further, 15 years, not 8. Michael had been paid to monitor me since before we'd even met. The journal came next, written in careful handwriting that must have belonged to Richard. Most entries were brief, factual notes about my life. High school graduation, college acceptance, job at the marketing firm. Each milestone documented like surveillance reports. Then I found the entry that changed everything. March 15, 2019. Elena's daughter is getting married. Michael Donald has been reliable for 3 years, keeping her unaware of the connection. Payment of $50,000 ensures continued silence about paternity and inheritance plans. She must never know until the time is right. My hands were shaking as I read it again. Michael had known about Richard since before our wedding. He'd married me knowing exactly who I was, knowing he was being paid to keep me ignorant of my own father. The metal box contained something worse. Photographs. Dozens of them, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Me walking to work. Me grocery shopping. Me having lunch with friends. Years of surveillance, all carefully dated and filed. And underneath the photos, a contract. Confidentiality and monitoring agreement between Richard D. Hale and Michael J. Donald, attorney at law. I read every word twice, understanding dawning with each paragraph. Michael hadn't just been paid to keep Richard's secret. He'd been paid to marry me. To get close, to monitor my activities, to report back on my life and relationships. The contract specified his compensation, regular payments for relationship maintenance and information gathering, with a substantial bonus if he successfully contained subjects' knowledge of paternity and inheritance rights through marriage or other intimate connection. Michael had been paid $250,000 to destroy my ability to discover the truth about Richard Hale. But the final document in the box explained everything else. A letter, addressed to me, written in Richard's careful handwriting. Sarah, if you are reading this, you have proven you are stronger than both Michael and I gave you credit for. The 30-day requirement was never about auditing financial records. It was about testing whether you had the intelligence and determination to uncover the truth I've been hiding. Michael Donald was hired to keep you ignorant and dependent. I wanted to see if losing everything would break you or make you fight back. The footsteps in the East Wing, the anonymous emails, the staff's warnings, all designed to see if you would investigate or retreat. You were never broken, Sarah. You were buried. But burial and death are not the same thing. The inheritance is yours. You've earned it by being exactly who I hoped you would be, a woman who refuses to be anyone's victim. Your father, Richard Hale.
P.S.
The East Wing contains everything Michael thought he'd successfully hidden. The chain was never meant to keep you out, it was meant to keep him from removing evidence until you were ready to find it. I sat back in Richard's chair, documents scattered across the desk, understanding finally complete. This had all been a test. The mysterious inheritance, the 30-day deadline, even my months of homelessness. Richard had orchestrated everything to see if I would transform from victim into detective. And I had. The woman who'd been digging through dumpsters 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place sat someone who'd just unraveled a conspiracy 15 years in the making. Michael had underestimated me twice now. He wouldn't get a third chance. The Travis County Courthouse looked exactly the same as it had 3 months ago. Same marble steps, same imposing columns, same sense of institutional power that had crushed me the last time I'd climbed them. But everything else had changed. This time, I wasn't walking in as a victim. I carried a leather briefcase, Richard's, borrowed from his study, containing copies of every document I'd found. Bank records, surveillance photos, the monitoring contract, Richard's final letter. 15 years of evidence that would destroy Michael's reputation and his freedom. My lawyer, David Chen, Rebecca's former partner who'd switched sides after seeing the documents, walked beside me. He'd taken the case pro bono after reviewing Richard's files, calling it the most clear-cut case of conspiracy and fraud he'd seen in 20 years of practice. "Remember," he said as we approached the courtroom doors, "let me handle the presentation. Your job is to remain calm and credible." I nodded, but we both knew this wasn't about legal strategy anymore. This was about justice. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread through Austin's legal community that Michael Donald, the respected corporate attorney who'd built his career on discretion and client trust, was fighting his ex-wife's inheritance claim. What they didn't know was that he was about to face accusations that would end his career. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table with his new legal team, having been forced to find different representation when Rebecca recused herself due to potential conflicts of interest. He wore his best suit, the charcoal gray one he'd always said made him look trustworthy. When he saw me enter, his expression shifted to that familiar smirk I remembered from our divorce proceedings. Confident. Condescending. The look of someone who'd never lost a battle that mattered to him. He leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, probably commenting on how much better I looked than the last time we'd been in court together. Clean clothes, professional appearance, every inch the competent heiress rather than the broken woman who'd left here with nothing. Judge Harrison called a session to order. Michael's attorney stood first, presenting their case with polished efficiency. "Your Honor, we're here because Ms. Donald has been declared mentally incompetent to handle a large inheritance. As documented in our previous divorce proceedings, she exhibited erratic behavior, made false accusations, and demonstrated an inability to manage basic financial responsibilities." The familiar words washed over me without impact. Months ago, they'd felt like hammers crushing my self-worth. Now they sounded like lines from someone else's story. Furthermore, the attorney continued, the circumstances surrounding this alleged inheritance are suspicious. Ms. Donald disappeared for months, living on the streets, before suddenly claiming to be the heir to a $69 million estate. We believe she's being manipulated by unknown parties seeking to exploit her vulnerable mental state. When he finished, Judge Harrison turned to our table. "Mr. Chen, your response?" David stood slowly, projecting the quiet confidence of someone holding winning cards. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that fundamentally alters the nature of this case." He activated the courtroom's display screen and began with Michael's consulting contract with Hale Industries. Line by line, payment by payment, building the case that Michael had been profiting from hiding my identity for years. Michael's smirk faded as the numbers accumulated on screen. Then came the monitoring agreement, the contract that proved he'd been paid to marry me, to keep me ignorant, to report on my activities to Richard Hale. I watched the color drain from Michael's face as his attorney frantically whispered questions he couldn't answer. But the surveillance photos were what broke him. Picture after picture of me, taken from a distance over years of marriage. Shopping, working, meeting friends, all documented and filed like evidence in some secret investigation. "These photographs," David announced, "were taken by private investigators hired by Mr. Donald, using funds provided by Richard Hale for the express purpose of monitoring his daughter without her knowledge or consent. Michael was no longer whispering to his attorney. He sat frozen, staring at the screen where his conspiracy was being displayed for everyone to see. That's when I decided to speak. I stood up, ignoring David's subtle gesture for me to remain seated. Your Honor, may I address the court? Judge Harrison nodded. I looked directly at Michael for the first time since entering the courtroom. His eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. 3 months ago, I walked out of this courthouse with nothing. I began, my voice steady and clear. My ex-husband had convinced everyone, including me, that I was worthless, incompetent, someone who couldn't be trusted with basic responsibilities. I took a step forward, never breaking eye contact with Michael. What we've learned today is that Michael Donald was paid $250,000 to make me believe those things about myself. He was hired to marry me, to monitor me, and to ensure I never discovered my own father's identity. The courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning. Mr. Donald, you spent 15 years convincing me I wasn't enough. But the truth is, you were terrified I was too much. I let the words settle. You don't get to rewrite history just because you can't handle who I became. When I told Michael he couldn't rewrite history, I felt something shift in that courtroom. Not just in me, but in everyone watching. Truth has power that lies can't touch. If you believe people should face consequences for their actions, if you think justice matters, smash that like button. Because someone who's been silenced needs to know their voice still has power. Michael's attorney was shuffling papers, looking for some legal foothold that no longer existed. Judge Harrison reviewed the evidence for another 10 minutes before reaching his decision. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud, conspiracy, and violation of privacy statutes. The gavel fell with finality. Michael's arrest happened 2 hours later in the parking garage beneath his law firm. By evening, the story had spread through every legal office in Austin. The respected attorney who'd built his career on client confidentiality had been secretly monitoring his own wife for years. The irony was perfect. Standing outside the courthouse in afternoon sunlight, I watched Michael being led away in handcuffs through the back of a police car. For just a moment, our eyes met through the window. This time, I was the one who smiled. Justice had a beautiful symmetry to it. The sunlight outside the courthouse felt different than it had 3 months ago. Warmer.
Cleaner.
Like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into a world that finally made sense. Reporters clustered near the courthouse steps, drawn by the story of a respected attorney's spectacular fall and his ex-wife's miraculous rise. Camera crews positioned themselves for the best angles while journalists checked their recording devices. Ms. Donald, a woman from Channel 8 called out, "How does it feel to have your inheritance secured?" I paused on the steps, looking back at the building where my old life had ended and my new one had begun. The marble looked the same, but I saw it differently now, not as a place of judgment, but as a place where truth had finally won. Justice feels exactly like it should, I said. Inevitable. Another reporter stepped forward. What are your plans for the $69 million inheritance? The question I'd been waiting for. The one that would define what kind of person I'd become during these months of testing. I'm reopening the women's shelter in Lubbock, I announced. The one I used to eat behind. The reporters exchanged glances, recognizing the story potential in that revelation. You were homeless after your divorce? For 3 months. I know what it feels like to have nowhere to go, to be invisible, to believe you're worth nothing. I looked directly into the cameras. No woman should have to experience that because someone else decided to destroy her life. Will you be pressing additional charges against your ex-husband? I considered the question. Michael had stolen years from me, had monetized my ignorance, had orchestrated my downfall for profit. The case for additional civil damages was strong. The criminal charges are sufficient. Some battles end when justice is served, not when revenge is complete. Behind me, courthouse security was escorting Michael toward a transport vehicle. Even from 50 yards away, I could see him watching me, could see the moment he heard my answer about pressing charges. He'd expected me to pursue every possible avenue for payback. the old Sarah would have. She'd have wanted to strip him of everything the way he'd stripped her. But the woman standing in this sunlight was different. I walked down the steps past the reporters, past the crowds of curious legal professionals who'd come to witness Michael Donald's humiliation. At the curb waited Richard's red Ferrari, which Webb had delivered that morning along with the keys and title. "One final gift from your father," he'd said. "He thought you might enjoy making an exit in style." The car was magnificent. Pristine leather, engine that purred like contained thunder, every surface designed for both beauty and speed. I'd never driven anything like it, but sliding behind the wheel felt natural, like claiming something that had always belonged to me. I started the engine and pulled away from the courthouse, leaving the reporters and cameras behind. The drive through Austin took me past landmarks from my former life. The country club where I'd attended charity brunches. The office building where I'd worked before Michael convinced me to quit. The neighborhood where our house had stood, now his and Rebecca's, probably redecorated to erase any trace of my existence. None of it hurt anymore. Those places belonged to someone else's story. 20 minutes later, I found myself driving past the original courthouse, the one where my divorce had been finalized, where I'd walked out with $112 and nowhere to sleep. I pulled over across the street and sat in the Ferrari, remembering that woman who'd stumbled down these same steps 3 months ago. Broken. Defeated. Convinced she deserved nothing better than whatever scraps Michael had left her. A police transport vehicle turned the corner, heading toward the county jail. Through the reinforced window, Michael's face was visible for just a moment. He was looking in my direction, though I doubted he could see me clearly from inside the vehicle. The contrast was perfect. Him in handcuffs, heading toward a cell where he'd have months to contemplate the consequences of 15 years of calculated cruelty. Me in his father's Ferrari, heading toward a future I'd earned by refusing to stay buried. I thought about the women's shelter in Lubbock, about the plans already forming in my mind for renovation and expansion. Richard's money would provide more than shelter. It would fund job training, legal aid, childcare, everything needed to help women rebuild their lives after men like Michael had finished with them. The transport vehicle disappeared around another corner. I put the Ferrari in gear and drove toward the highway, toward Hale Ranch, toward the life I discovered I was strong enough to claim. In the rearview mirror, the courthouse grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. Some chapters ended with periods. Others ended with exclamation points. This one ended with freedom. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated women's shelter in Lubbock, watching Maria, the former Hale Ranch housekeeper who joined me as program director, help a young mother fill out intake forms. The woman looked exactly like I had that night behind the diner. Hollow eyes, trembling hands, carrying everything she owned in a garbage bag. The same expression of someone who'd stopped believing she deserved better. "It gets easier," I told her quietly. "Not immediately, but it gets easier." She looked up at me with the wariness of someone who'd been lied to too many times. "How would you know?" I smiled and gestured around the shelter. Clean beds, a daycare center, computers for job searches, legal aid office, counseling rooms. Everything I'd wished for during those months of sleeping in my car. Because I built this place for me as much as for you. The Lubbock Women's Recovery Center now served 200 women annually. Job training programs had a 90% placement rate. Legal aid services had helped dozens of women escape abusive relationships with their dignity intact. The child care center meant mothers could work without worrying about their children's safety. Richard's money had bought more than buildings. It had bought hope, multiplied and distributed to women who'd been convinced they were worth nothing. But the real victory wasn't the shelter or the money, or even seeing Michael sentenced to 5 years for fraud and conspiracy. The real victory was understanding something fundamental about survival. Sometimes, life buries you to see if you'll grow roots or rot. I chose to grow, and make sure every woman who's ever been left in the dirt knows she can, too. People ask me what I learned from losing everything and finding it again. They want to know the secret to surviving when powerful people decide you don't matter anymore. The answer is simpler than most people want to believe. You matter because you decide you matter. Not because of your bank account or your marriage or your job or anything else someone can take away from you. You matter because you refuse to disappear. This story isn't unique because of the inheritance or the dramatic reveal. It's unique because someone refused to stay buried. Every single person watching this has that same power to decide their story isn't over yet. If you're still here, still fighting, still believing you can rebuild, you're exactly who needs to be part of this community. Subscribe not just for more stories, but because your presence here matters to someone who needs hope. What would you have done in my place? When Michael was taking everything, when the inheritance seemed too good to be true, when you had the choice between revenge and rebuilding. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's been convinced they're not strong enough to fight back, share it with them. Sometimes we need proof that resurrection is possible before we can believe in our own. The woman filling out forms at Maria's desk looked up at me again, this time with something different in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or the first hint of hope. Either way, it was a beginning. Because that's what we're all looking for, isn't it? Not an ending. A beginning.